From the Institute for Research on Public Policy, this is Future-Proofing Canada. I'm your host, Jennifer Ditchburn, the President and CEO of the IRPP. There's a lot coming at us these days. Our country faces interconnected challenges, including a new geopolitical world order, economic headwinds, climate change, technological disruptions, shifting demographics, and deepening inequality. Future-Proofing Canada brings you conversations with the people who are looking for solutions to these challenges. They envision a Canada that's confident and ready to seize opportunities. On today's show, I'm joined by Matthew Shoemaker, Mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. For thousands of years, the area where the three Great Lakes converge has been a trading hub. The Sault became an important industrial centre about a century ago and is best known for its steel industry. The city is so close to the United States, it literally faces its twin across the St. Mary's River, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And it's no stranger to tensions with the United States. In the War of 1812, people who lived in these parts successfully fended off American troops who had designs on our side of the border. But for decades now, the Sault has relied on the free flow of trade between Canada and the US. The latest 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum announced by the Trump administration are a body blow to the local economy. Mayor Shoemaker is lobbying hard across the border to change a situation he can't make any sense of, but he also has ideas for what Canadian governments can do to help the city weather the storm and come out even stronger. Here's our conversation. Mayor Shoemaker, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about your journey to the mayor's office. I understand your family has long roots in Sault Ste. Marie.
Well, I've certainly been here my whole life, other than some time away for university. But my parents, neither of them are from the Sault. My dad was born and raised in southern Ontario and southwestern Ontario. My mom's an Italian immigrant, so she was born and raised in Italy and moved here when she was 17 without her parents. Her parents stayed behind in Italy. She had a couple of siblings here in the Sault, all of whom came here ultimately because of the steel plant. So we owe a lot of our family's success to Sault Ste. Marie and everything that it's been able to offer my family and my parents before me. And it's presenting good opportunities for me in my life. And I hope that it has those opportunities still available for my young kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. So I hope to, to leave them a city that they can want to live in and have the ability to live in when they're older.
I think our definitions of long roots are probably different depending on where we come from in the country or our perceptions as kids of newcomers, right? And you were a law student, and you were at the University of Ottawa for some time. I'm always fascinated about why people are drawn to put their name on a ballot. What was it that spurred you to aim for the highest office in town?
Well, it's a little bit. I was on city council for 8 years before I was mayor. So really the first step of wanting to put my name on a ballot was the more challenging one, or the one that I wrestled with more. But it really is because of the opportunity that the Sault gave to my family. I mean, my mom, when she was born and raised in Italy, they're from southern Italy, and it was literally dirt floor poor. So my mom and her siblings, there was 11 of them in the family. They were born in their house. There were no hospitals nearby. They're a very rural family growing up. They had a farm. They hunted for food. They made their own food, of course, in good Italian tradition. So they made a great life for themselves. My mom and several of her siblings who moved to Sault Ste. Marie made good lives for themselves. My mom met my dad when she came to Sault Ste. Marie. He was here to study at Sault College back in the 70s. And they made a good middle-class family, coming from nothing and making a good middle-class family for me and my siblings. Meant that, it was my responsibility to give back to the community that gave me so much. So that's really why I got involved in politics. When I'd gone away for university, I lived in Ottawa, and I thought it was a really great city. Lots to do and lots to keep people busy and active. Lots of recreational offerings, lots of retail offerings, lots of nightlife offerings, and I wanted the Sioux to have more of that, right? So I wanted to give back in a way that my community had, allowed me to have a good, healthy middle class life, but I also wanted to make it a more enjoyable place to be, and that's what we've tried to do over the last 10 years that I've been involved.
So people in Ontario would be familiar with the Sioux, and especially if you're involved in hockey or follow junior hockey. But other people that are listening to this from other parts of the country might not be so familiar with the city. Can you tell us just briefly a little bit about what's particular about Sault Ste. Marie and what the industrial history is around the city?
Yeah, well, I mean, the city is one of the oldest settlements in North America. 1668 is the date that our neighbors across the river in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, put on their welcome signage. So we never really pegged the date quite as uh, succinctly or definitively as they do across the river, but we have been the gathering place for Indigenous people from across North America for thousands of years. This place was traditionally known as Bawating, and it is the place where Lake Superior, Lake Huron, and Lake Michigan all converge. So it was a place really where people came and traded in goods from across the American Midwest, the Canadian West, the Canadian North, and the East Coast. So it is the place. Bawating literally means place of the rapids and gathering place. So it was the place where has been for thousands of years this traditional Indigenous trading community, and it is also because of that reason, because of the rapids that exist here, that we developed a hydroelectric dam 120 years ago, 130 years ago, that offered cheap power for industry. And that was what the appeal was at the time for places like St. Mary's Paper, that was a 100-year-old paper mill that closed about a decade ago now. But for 100 and some years, it sustained the economy of this community. After the paper mill was built, the steel plant was built right next to it. So it became this industrial place where it made good economic sense to have these industries there in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And that's how our industry developed. We had a great forestry sector, a great steel sector, and then the community blossomed around that to where it is now, which is about a community of 78,000 people. We are, of course, a northern community, fairly cold here in the winter, so lots of hockey. And hockey is deeply rooted in our community. We got the Greyhounds, who are part of the OHL, who have many years of good success. They're going to make the playoffs this year for sure. They're seventh or eighth ranked, so they're kind of at the bottom of the playoff run. But we are still going to be rooting for them pretty ferociously during the playoff period.
Well, anything's possible, right?
That's right.
When you get to the playoffs. So across the St. Mary's River. I mean, everybody in your community is used to crossing the International Bridge and shopping and filling up for gas. And as I understand it, a very close relationship with people in the Sioux on the other side of the
Our Twin
river.
City.
What's been the impact of the new tariff regime that was imposed by the Trump administration in this very short term since the 25% tariff was put on Canadian steel and aluminum?
Yeah, well, we lived through it in 2018 and 19 when the first Trump administration imposed steel and aluminum tariffs on our major export, which is steel. And there's been a difference though this term to last term, or to this Trump term to the last Trump term, I should say, because last time during the Trump presidency, there was never talk of annexing us by economic force. There was never talk of crippling the Canadian economy so that we wanted to join the U.S. or that we would willingly be begging the U.S. to take us, which is a real change in rhetoric from the administration in Washington, and it has divided Canadians in the sense, and divided Siouxites in the sense that Sioux Ontarians, we are in the somewhat of a unique position in that we are about 5 times larger than our counterparts in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and in terms of population base, and their economy relies on Canadians going over there. I mean, they've got two or three stores that, they've got a Myers and a Walmart and a Hobby Lobby and things of this nature that they could never sustain with their population base, but that is dependent on Canadians going across there and spending Canadian dollars to sustain the retail offerings that they have, right? So they have been reliant on us for generations because we are the bigger of the two communities. So what it has done is caused Canadians to say, I'm going to keep all my dollars on the Canadian side. When I go to the grocery store in Sault, Ontario, which I never used to do, I used to go in Sault, Michigan, not myself personally, but this is what Canadians are saying. I'm going to spend on Canadian products at Canadian stores. I'm going to go to Metro and Food Basics instead of Myers and Walmart. And I'm going to ensure that every dollar I spend is spent on this side of the border. An hour from here, there is a place called Mackinac Island, and 2 hours from here, there's a place called Traverse City that are both really popular tourism spots for Canadians, closer than anywhere else in Canada you can get to that have, a tourist appeal and a quaint town appeal. Uh, it would be no exaggeration to say anecdotally, I've heard hundreds of people say they're canceling those trips that we regularly take to Mackinac and to Traverse City, and even
Mhm.
further afield into Detroit and into Milwaukee, because Canadians want to keep their dollars at home. So it has put a real strain on the relationship between the two communities. I hope not irreparably. We did see a strain in the relationship during COVID because of the difference in the approach that our government took to responding to COVID versus the American government took to responding to COVID. So there was a strain there that was really starting to be healed and starting to get back to normal. And now it has opened up a new division between our communities. And we're hoping that we can get over it in the near term and start repairing those relationships again. Because for 213 years, we have been each other's closest friends and allies.
Mhm. A lot of us live close to the U.S. border. I'm in Montreal today, and growing up, we spent so much time going across to Vermont or upstate New York, and in Ottawa, we're so close to the border as well. But there are going to be impacts. We're talking about the short term, but there'll be important medium term impacts if the tariffs persist. Can you talk a little bit about the steel and manufacturing sector and what you're seeing and what impact they'll have on the local economy?
Yeah, it's going to have a huge impact. I think that you are going to see, the steel plant in a fairly precarious position. We've had, when the tariffs were implemented in 2018 and 19, the steel plant was just coming out of creditor protection, and so it had a healthy balance sheet. It had the price of steel was better, and so it had a couple of things going for it that allowed it to navigate that storm better than it currently has. And it still cost the steel plant hundreds of millions of dollars in those days for tariffs that were in place for 11 months. And that's when you weren't talking about the potential for stacking tariffs in addition to steel and aluminum. They're talking about economy wide tariffs potentially. They're talking about reciprocal tariffs for everything from the GST to our supply management industry. So it's really an uncertain time. And after the 2018-19 tariff scare and the emergence from creditor protection in and around the same time, the steel plant made the strategic decision to transition from coal-based steelmaking to electricity-based steelmaking. So they went from a blast furnace and are transitioning to an electric arc furnace, but they're only halfway across the river. And by that, I mean metaphorically, not across the
Right.
river into Sioux, Michigan. They're only halfway across the river in that they've got all the old costs of creating steel the coal-based way, and they've got a lot of the new costs of creating steel the electricity-based way. And until they're fully across that river, they are going to be spending not quite double the amount of money, but significantly more to run two operations to make sure that the new way is going to work as it should, and the old way continues to work to supply them the money to build the new processes. And then you add the tariffs on top of that, and it creates this uncertainty and this precariousness that they're facing. So that's why we are lobbying so hard with the federal government and with our communities, alongside our Border Mayors Coalition to try and get support for industry and support for workers during this time, because it really is a threatened position that we are in.
Is the transition to electricity-based processes, I mean, there's a strategic, arguably a strategic advantage for Canadian industry to go this route, to sort of get ahead of some of the technological quote unquote green changes that are coming in terms of the wider energy transition. But in this difficult period, are there certain programs or policies that either the Ontario government or the federal government could be helping your city with, and the workers in the city, that would sort of tide them over until hopefully we're past this period?
Well, we got to get there, and it would be foolish for the provincial and federal governments not to help get there because the feds have invested, with grants and loans, up to $450 million in the transition to this electricity-based steelmaking, because it's the equivalent of taking a million vehicles off the road. The stat is that of the climate targets that Ontario needs to meet, transitioning the steel plant to electricity-based steelmaking from coal-based steelmaking achieves almost 100% of those targets just on its own. The whole province's targets, just the steel plant is meeting those,
That's
just
incredible. Yeah.
about, yeah, by converting to electricity-based steelmaking, not including the fact that Stelco and Dofasco are also transitioning to electricity-based steelmaking. So it really is going to be far in excess of the targets Ontario is looking to meet. So that is why it's going to make a lot of sense to do it this way when we get to that other side of the river, but we need to get there. And so, whatever supports need to be put in place to get us there have to be on the table. And that's what we have been arguing for as a municipality, along with our fellow border mayors, to say not just the steel industry in Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton and Regina, but the aluminum industry in Quebec and the auto industry in Windsor. We are going to need the supports to modernize, to get through this trade war so that we can be sustainable in the long term. And there's one thing that often goes unsaid or uncountered when the president talks about putting these tariffs on. He lets on that the industry that exists here exists because of some virtuousness of the American government's past that allowed industry to set up on the northern side of the border. I mean, I explained in my intro that the Sioux exists as an industrial town because it was the place where there was access to markets from the access to the three Great Lakes. There were hydroelectricity. There was hydroelectricity, and there still is. That was at affordable rates back then. And there is also iron ore mining in the Algoma district. So I mean, there is a economic reason why we make steel here. It's not because American plants said we'll give a little piece of the pie to Canada. It's because it made economic sense to make steel here. It's because it made economic sense to make paper here for 120 years before glossy magazine paper went out of style. And so there are reasons why these industries exist. There are reasons why automotive plants are based in Windsor. There are reasons why the CP and CN rails are based in Montreal, and steel mills and aluminum mills in Quebec and Regina. And so this is not going to change because of the whims of the current administration. It still makes economic sense to make steel here, but we need the support to make sure that our economy isn't crippled by American efforts to cripple it over the course of the next 3 years and 8 months.
So let me dig into that a little bit more, in terms of the support. So I mean, part of what I think I'm hearing from you as well is diversification of markets too, which would finding new markets for steel. So on the economic side, what would the supports look like that you would hope that our other levels of politician are looking at right now? And I understand we're in a period of flux, but they're all listening and putting ideas into their platforms, right?
There is, if we're going to be doing things like hitting 2% of our NATO targets and we're building more light armored vehicles, the plate that comes from Algoma Steel is military grade plate and has been used in the past in American military vehicles. So it is a one way that they can support the steel industry by using Algoma Steel made plate to support an effort that they're trying to do, which is to achieve 2% of our GDP spending for military purposes. There is also shipbuilding contracts that are being awarded to shipbuilders in the East Coast. And again, plate and coiled steel from Algoma Steel is the perfect solution to what those shipbuilders could be doing. We have steel that went into the Gordie Howe Bridge in Windsor, that goes into Ford Broncos and Teslas. So we have high grade, high quality steel, and not the type of steel that really is undercutting the Canadian market, and that's Chinese dumped steel. And so, in terms of helping the domestic steel industry, ensuring a buy Canadian policy for military procurement would be one of the ways that they can go about it. Ensuring that there are trade repercussions for companies from Asia or Europe or Africa that dump steel in the Canadian market that is not of the same quality or of the same standard that we would expect in our roads and overpasses and bridges and things and Canadian infrastructure, right? So making sure that the Canadian market is supported by Canadian government spending. That's one way where they could help the existing industries in the community, like the steel industry. We've also got a significant employer that is a tube mill that makes seamless pipe that's used for energy drilling. So the more oil diversification or pipelines that get built across the country, the better our tube mill does. And so Canadian infrastructure projects like that are helpful not just to the Alberta economy, but to the economy across Canada, because in places like Sault Ste. Marie, we make the pipe that would go into these pipelines or that would go into oil exploration, right? So that is one way that they can help with the industries that are already here. In terms of diversifying the economy, we have a challenge in the Soo. We have had a challenge for the last 25 years, I would say, in that our death rate outstrips our birth rate. And so we have a shrinking population, but we still have jobs that are going unfilled. So, for the past 2 years, we have had a red hot job market where we haven't been able to fill every job that is available because of the lack of population base to fill those jobs. So what the feds came up with was a rural and northern immigration program. It was across 18 communities in the country. The Soo really spearheaded the advocacy on this program with my predecessor and the previous council, of which I was a part, who really said we need a targeted immigration program that spreads the immigration distribution across the country. Instead of everybody just going to Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, we need people in smaller cities. And it has really helped. And it has meant a 5% growth in our population, which is the first time our population's grown in 40 years. So it is also recognized, I would say, more broadly, and there is a much deeper social acceptance to the need for immigration in communities like Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury and North Bay and Thunder Bay, because we've been shrinking for so many years that people were worried that the last person out was going to have to turn off the lights. So having new immigrants and having population growth has always been looked at as one of the ways where we were going to solve our demographic issues. And now that we've got it, we have the jobs to put new immigrants into. We have the need for them. They're growing our population base and our tax base. And so it's diversifying our economy in that with everybody who comes here that's new, they are going to either work in a job that was going to go unfilled, or they're going to open up their own business and start a new path and create a new economic opportunity for themselves and their families. So it really has been a great program, and it's the type of program that it exemplifies how the Canadian government or the provincial government, and there are other examples I could use for them, how they can target programs to communities that will help them meet the needs of the 21st century.
Has the tightening of immigration numbers had a negative effect in the last, how many months has it been? Let's say 6 months. I don't have the number in
Yeah,
front of me.
well, there has been the risk that there would be they would cancel this program. So the program was called the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program, RNIP
Right.
for short. And it expired kind of around the same time. The pilot aspect of it expired right around the same time that they were going through all this upheaval in the immigration system. And so there was risk that they wouldn't put a new program back in place, or that they wouldn't make it permanent. what they ultimately did end up doing, I think in large part because of the advocacy of myself and my northern counterparts in Sudbury, Thunder Bay, Timmins, and North Bay, to say we need this program, and it has helped all of our communities grow over the last couple of years since it was put into effect. Um, we advocated for it, and they created a new pilot program. So just a pilot program still, but at least it's still in place. The Rural Community Immigration Program, or RCIP for short, and it will run for the next couple of years with the promise that it will be made permanent. Now that is, up
Mm-hmm.
to some future government to decide, whoever the government's going to be in a couple of years from now. We're really happy that the program's been made permanent, at least in the short term, that the pilot has been extended, at least in the short term, so that we can prove it out again for the next 2 years. And we have been the most successful of any RNIP community to accept invitees. We have accepted the first immigrants under that program a couple of years ago, and we've accepted more, I would say, per capita than many of the other communities. So it has been a good program. There was some concern that it wouldn't be extended given the upheaval in the immigration file. Where it has hurt us, though, is in the post-secondary sector. Our university and college, because of the freeze in tuition fees in 2018 that continues to this day, and because of the reliance that made them have on international students, became, like other universities, dependent on that revenue. And when those numbers were cut, it's meant significant deficits at the college and a significantly reduced balance sheet at the university. And so we have advocated with our college and university for some middle ground there, because we need the help in our post-secondary institutions. It's one of the ways we have been and continue to look to diversify our economies by building up our university and college in terms of the economic impact that they have in our community and kind of in our district. But it is one of the areas where the policy changes at the federal and provincial governments have had a real detrimental effect on their bottom line and our community's benefit that we're getting from them.
We talked about the economic side in terms of how the different levels of government can help. Talked about immigration. On the social side, because there are social impacts when people's jobs are in peril, or they lose their job, or they're laid off temporarily, are there tweaks to social programs that would help in the short to medium term in the city?
Well, I think there's going to have to be supports for employees. I mean, every community that is under threat of tariffs has acknowledged that supports will need to be in place. There's been already some level of labor disruption at Algoma Steel because of the tariffs. And so, if it hangs on for a longer period of time, the threat of tariffs or the reality of tariffs, then the government's going to have to come up with a spending plan to ensure that those short-term effects, until the tariff issue is resolved, are mitigated to the greatest degree possible. I mean, from the municipal budget, we are talking about a $200 million budget a year. We're not going to be able to support, hundreds or maybe thousands of employees from the industries across town that will be affected by tariffs. So we simply don't have the fiscal capacity to do that. There's been talk of, COVID era type programs. I think that's good. I think that's a good short-term measure to try and help people. But in the long term, spending some of that money and trying to alleviate the trade irritants, I think will have a better effect. So getting to 2% of GDP spending on NATO commitments, I think, is a good use of money to show that we are, doing our part to alleviate the concerns of governments across the world. Frankly, this isn't just the American government saying we need to be at 2%. This governments across Europe and the U.S. saying that we need to be at 2% of our NATO target. We definitely do, and so putting money into that program, putting money into resolving that issue is important in the long term and in the medium term. But in the short term, we are going to need supports for employees if this continues for any significant period of time. And by that I mean another 6 to 8 weeks. It's going to be a real crucial time for industries, especially if these tariffs are stacked one on top of the other that are threatened to come in on April 2nd.
So what, part of our motivation for this podcast is to think about what Canada could be in the future and how it could be more resilient in an economic and social sense. What would you imagine Sault Ste. Marie looking like in, let's say, 20 years that would make it a more resilient place and perhaps an example for other cities in Canada?
Well, what I do think is that we have a lot of good things going. We've got a good industrial foundation on which our economy is built, but we've tried to diversify that with things like the post-secondary institutions. We've tried to diversify it with looking at, for example, the expansion of the Northern Ontario School of Medicine into Sault Ste. Marie. They've got a campus in Sudbury and Thunder Bay, but looking at expanding their presence in Sault Ste. Marie, especially right now, where we are one of the communities that is gripped with a physician shortage, a family physician shortage. That's been in the news quite a bit over the past 12 months. 10,000 patients have lost access to a doctor in a community of 78,000 people is significant. So we are looking to target investments to make sure that we are diversifying our economy. Another way that we have been advocating for the diversification of our economy and that we hope 20 years from now or sooner, frankly, will show some results is in lottery and gaming. We have the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation was moved here. And it was announced that it was moving here in 1987. 1993, they opened their doors. And we had 85% of the workforce here at that time. And then since that time, it's been a slow drip of the workforce back to Toronto, the pull of the center of the universe, as Canadians colloquially call Toronto.
And they call it other things too, but we won't get into
we won't get into that without the bleeping ready. But we now have about 45% of the workforce here, and the balance of it, and the majority of it, I should say, is in Toronto, including much of the executive level positions at the company, save and except a few VPs. So we think that support from government directly with things like broader public sector jobs, like the OLG being based in Sault Ste. Marie, as they historically were, is a good way to diversify the provincial offerings outside of the core of Toronto. We think expanding the need for, the reliance and the impact that the post-secondary institutions are having in our communities is one of the ways that we can diversify our economy, especially if we're doing things like helping social issues that we've got, like a physician shortage and like a mental health and addictions crisis, by growing doctors within the community locally. And to do this, we're not, going to the government hat in hand and saying, give us the money to do this. We're preparing the plans. We're ready to invest capital dollars. We will need federal and provincial help to do it, but we are not going to say until we get the federal and provincial money, we're going to wait to make the plan. We're making the plan, we're carrying out the plan, and we're asking the provincial and federal governments to say, here's the success we're having. Fund the success so that we can be the example of communities across Canada or Ontario. And show them how you diversify your economy. Because for the last, frankly, 50 years, call it, the steel plant has had ebbs and flows that has seen it go into creditor protection 3 or 4 times. We can't afford it going into creditor protection all these times over again. And the transition to electricity-based steelmaking will help them adjust to the market conditions better. But we also need to make sure that the reduction in workforce that's going to come from that has a place to go. OLG is an obvious spot. Research that we could be doing at the university and college level is another obvious spot. Expansion of the School of Medicine is another spot. And building a port is one of the other ways that we are looking to tackle the challenges of, not a challenge, but we have really, I would, to use a bad pun, missed the boat on taking advantage of our strategic location at the heart of the Great Lakes. We do have a port inside Algoma Steel, for Algoma Steel, but we've never had a port to help industry more broadly in the community ship their products by water. which is the cheapest way to ship products. So if we have been using our economic development team at the city to develop a port plan, we will be putting capital dollars into it. And so we will be asking the feds and the province to come along with us and to get that port built to help those industries expand that are already in our city. So that, is one of the things that make up the recipe for where I hope we'll be in the next 20 years with a lively port, a strong Ontario Lottery Corporation, and the industries that it supports, because it's not just OLG here. It's offshoot industries that have been set up here to support the OLG. Good post-secondary institutions, and built on the foundation of the tube mill and the steel plant. And that's 20 years from now what I hope the Soo will be.
Well, Mayor Shoemaker, thank you so much for joining us on the IRPP podcast. And it sounds like there are a lot of opportunities for you and your fellow Sooites. I learned that today is how you say people from the Soo. So good luck to you, and thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Future Proofing Canada. Our executive producer is Cléa Desjardins. Our producer is Ricardo Montrose, and our production assistants are Elissa Coury and Blair Elliott. The show is mixed and engineered by Jackie Gallant, who also does our music. If you like what you heard and you'd like to find out more about our work at the IRPP, you can head over to irpp.org. You can subscribe to our newsletters and check out all our latest publications. And if you really, really like what you heard, leave us a review on your podcast app or share your feedback on social media. You can find us on most platforms at IRPP. For the Institute for Research on Public Policy, I'm Jennifer Ditchburn. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode of Future Proofing Canada.